All right, so we are on the section here. Let me get this to work here. We are on the we're on the part 4, which is the authority of the king. And the section we're going to cover tonight, the first one is going to be the establishment of Jesus' headquarters in Capernaum. So up to this time, he hasn't really had a headquarters. He's just opened up his ministry, and he's been doing preaching down in Galilee area. Last week we talked about he went up to Nazareth where they tried to kill him. And so now he's going to head back to Capernaum. And this, of course, is going to be his home base for most of his ministry. In fact, most of his ministry happens within the Galilee region. And so Capernaum is going to be an important place for Christ. So as we take a look at the authority of the king section, again, the authority of the king is where he's now demonstrating he has authority over a multitude of areas. You've got authority over demons, we'll talk about tonight, disease, authority to heal, over nature, defilement, sins. I mean, you name it, he's going to demonstrate in this whole next section here that he not only claims to be the Messiah, but he can prove it, that he actually has the resume, because he can demonstrate his authority as the Messiah. And of course, at the end of that, there's going to have to be a decision be made by different people. Do you believe or not that he's the Messiah? And people are going to start making some different decisions at that. So we've got the section 4, the authority. So we're going to be looking at the headquarters in Capernaum. We'll look at his authority over demons, and then we'll look at his authority over disease tonight. Those will be the 3 areas. So again, just as a setup here, last week he was in Nazareth, right? And he read from Isaiah, and he only read 1.5 verses, showing that he was the Messiah. And he said, today this has been fulfilled in your hearing. And then he gave the example of the 2 Gentiles, or Elijah and Elisha, that went out and ministered to 2 Gentiles. And after that, they just got in a huge wrath and tried to throw him off the cliff to kill him, and he escaped. So we're picking that up now. Right after that event, this is where we get to the next part in Matthew chapter 4, verse 13 through 17. It says, and leaving Nazareth, after they tried to kill him, he came and settled in Capernaum. So now again, he's settling there. Now that's the key word here. He's not just visiting, but he's now going to settle, and this will be his home base. He came and settled in Capernaum, which is by the sea, in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. This was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet, saying, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who were sitting in darkness saw a great light, and to those who were sitting in the land and shadow of death, upon them a light has dawned. From that time, Jesus began to preach and say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So again, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's the same thing that John the Baptist has been preaching for a while. Now he's in prison, and that's what Jesus has been preaching throughout his teaching ministry and preaching ministry in Galilee. All right, so let's just break this down here for you tonight. First of all, it says that he's in Capernaum. Now, this is in the region that was settled by the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali after the conquest of Joshua. So Joshua went in there, and they, of course, divided the land of Israel into these different regions based off of the different tribes. And what we see here is that Matthew says that Jesus coming into Capernaum and then settling there is, in fact, a fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 9, 1 through 2. Now, if you know anything about Isaiah chapter 9, actually Isaiah chapter 7 through Isaiah chapter 9, these are the prophecies of the Messiah. These are the specific messianic prophecies in those 3 chapters. And so chapter 9, 1 through 2 is talking about the Messiah in Isaiah. And Matthew is going to say that that prophecy in Isaiah has been fulfilled by Jesus coming into this particular region, right? He's the fulfillment of that. And one of the things that John has pointed out, remember going back to John's themes, he has a sub-theme of light and darkness. Remember I told you about that? So look at how John frequently uses the contrast between light and darkness. And Jesus is the light that has come into the world, right? So Isaiah 9, 1 through 2 prophesies about this light. So it says, the people who are sitting in darkness saw a great light, and to those who are sitting in the land of shadow of death, upon them a light has dawned. So Matthew says that when Christ comes down to this region, the region of Zebulun and Naphtali, and Christ settles there, that now this light that was prophesied by Isaiah has come. And of course, in this region, Christ is going to do the vast majority of his miracles. Most of the miracles and most of the teaching and preaching Christ does in all the Gospels happen in this area. Very little of it happens up in Jerusalem, because remember, he's trying to escape, right? He had to leave and flee Jerusalem to come down to this area to escape the political persecution after John the Baptist was thrown into prison. So this region now is going to get the light. The light is there, and he's going to preach and teach and do massive miracles. What you have in this particular region are two particular cities that Christ will call out later on, and he will condemn them, the cities of Bethsaida and Chorazin, right? And he will condemn them for not believing in him, and there'll be special condemnation on those two cities. And the reason for that is because those two cities are in this region. And so the light has come to them, they refuse to believe, and so they'll get special condemnation for their lack of belief, right? Okay. And what we see here in this quotation from Isaiah 9, what we see a couple of things here is that it says that this is the Galilee of the Gentiles. And in 2 Kings 15 and 17, 24 to 27, what we see here, the reason why it's called Galilee of the Galilees is because when the Jews were deported from this particular area of Israel, from the Assyrian captivity, that a whole bunch of Gentiles came into this land. So by the time we have a time of Christ here, we have an area that, yes, it is Jewish controlled, but it is highly populated by Gentiles, unlike what you would have in the Jerusalem, Judea area, right? So what we're going to see here is that Christ actually plants himself in a place that's going to be super important for his ministry, and it's a place where there's lots of Gentiles. And we're going to actually see that Gentiles do respond to him actually more frequently and often, and sometimes in a better way than the Jewish people do, right? And in fact, we've got either from the Jewish geographer Strabo or from Josephus himself, they record that Egyptians, Arabians, Phoenicians, all those different people came into the area. And in fact, this area was primarily Gentile and heathen, even though it was Jewish controlled. So Jesus has put himself into a place where he's got a huge influence over Gentiles. So even though he's come to be the Jewish Messiah, he's put himself in a place where the Gentiles are going to hear, okay? That's the first thing. Now, just from a map, gosh, this does not show up well. I apologize for that. That's horrible. Just so you can see here, the red circle on the left, the bottom left, that's Nazareth. So that's where he just came from, right? And you've got Cana that's a little bit up and to the right of that. That's again where the nobleman had to come up from Cana up to Nazareth and go back down. So you can see this huge kind of mountain they had to climb and get back down again. And then Capernaum is all the way up there in the Sea of Galilee, up there kind of in the middle, just a little bit to the left. So he's gone from Nazareth and he's gone all the way up there to Capernaum. And then a lot of his ministry is going to happen around the Sea of Galilee region, right? So just to kind of give you a geographical idea of where Christ is at. Okay. A couple of things about the town of Capernaum that are important. First of all, it's a well-known city, and we're going to talk about where it was staged at, and why Christ actually picked it. He didn't just pick a town; he picked a key important town of Capernaum. And this is what it says. Page says this about Capernaum. It says the wealthy lived in the upper part of the town, now occupied by a Greek Orthodox church. I've been there. And monastery. Even today remains a large villas dating to the Roman period are found here. During the time of Jesus, we would expect to find Jairus, the leader of the Capernaum synagogue, the Roman centurion, and perhaps Levi, the tax collector, right? Matthew, right? The person writing the gospel, right? Living in this upper part of town. That's where the rich people live, and the poor people live down in the bottom part of this town, right? And one of, if not the oldest synagogue that we have in all of Israel is in Capernaum. So if you go there today, you'll see the ruins of a synagogue that was built on top of the one that Christ was at. So it's a little bit later than the time of Christ, but one of the oldest synagogues that we have is located right there in that town. So if you've never had a chance to go on a trip to Israel, let me know. I can hook you up and it will just like, change the way you read the Bible sometimes. I will not pay for it, but I will definitely hook you up. I'll hook you up, man. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah. So why Capernaum? Because he actually settles here. It's not just like passing through. He settles here. Why Capernaum? Again, Christ picks it for a very important reason. He couldn't go back to Jerusalem. That's the first thing is right now he's got to let the dust settle, right? John the Baptist has been arrested. Christ has to leave. Even later on in his ministry, the Pharisees, trying to sort of pretend like they're being friends with him, warn him, don't go back to Jerusalem because they're trying to kill you. Here's trying to kill you, right? So he's got to leave Jerusalem. So the idea then is, okay, well, where else am I going to go? Where's the strategic location? If it's not Jerusalem, it's got to be some other strategic location, right? Now, Capernaum was ideal, right? Because Capernaum was a town situated on what's called the Via Maris, or the Way of the Sea. So there was this major trade route, military route that went all the way from Egypt all the way up the coastline of Israel, cut through past Capernaum, and then it would go up into Mesopotamia, all into those northern areas up there. So it was this major trade route. So if you wanted to get down to Africa, if you wanted to get to Mesopotamia, you came down to the Via Maris. So whoever controlled that, either militarily or economically, was in power. Well, this town is right there. You have to go through it, right? So it's a major sort of transit area for that, right? So it's not like Nazareth, which is up in the hillside, very obscure. No one wants to go to Nazareth. Even today, no one wants to go up there except to see where maybe Christ lived, right? No one wants to go to Nazareth, right? It's not on your list of the 10 things to see in Israel. But Capernaum, big fishing area, lots of transit that's going on through there. Also, it was a major tax collection station, again, because it's on the Via Maris. So you had a lot of people come here. Now think about this. If you want to have a ministry and you want to do some stuff and you want to spread the word as quickly as you can, you're going to want to find a place where lots of people, cosmopolitan area. Does that make sense? You find a place where lots of travelers are coming in on airplanes and they're going out on boats and whatever, right? That's how you're going to do it. Kind of like Seattle. Kind of like Seattle. You're not going to go to Leavenworth. I love Leavenworth, but you're not going to go to Leavenworth to establish your place. So you're going to find a place here that's like that. Now, the Romans also, they built this really nice stone road that led through. So in other words, it made transit super easy. Word could spread along that. And because this area was highly populated by Gentiles, those Gentiles many times are coming in from commerce too. They would take it back, so that when we see, even in the book of Acts, we see people that know about Christ outside of the land, it's because Christ has selected a place to do his ministry, his preaching, and his miracles that he knows is going to automatically spread, right? And that's how it works. So very strategic for him to pick the town of Capernaum, okay? Now, it's also interesting that what we see here is Matthew quotes Isaiah 9. And like I said, Isaiah 9, chapters 7 through 9 are these great messianic prophecies. It's where we get the virgin birth. It's where we get the fact that he would call the mighty God, the Prince of Peace, right? Wonderful Counselor. All that comes from Isaiah chapter 9. In fact, that's all comes right before this. And so in this great messianic passage of scripture, we see that this is attributed to Christ. Well, if you just keep on going down in Isaiah 9, you find out that he is the mighty God. So Matthew's attributing the messianic prophecies of Isaiah 9 to Christ. So all you have to do is go back and read Isaiah 9:6, right? Where you start getting into all of the identification of who this Messiah is going to be. And so it's really important to understand that that's one of the things that Matthew is actually doing here. So a lot of times when people go through the life of Christ, they're going to divide it up into regions. I'm doing it chronologically, right? We're going through the life of Christ chronologically. Some people do it by regions. And of course, his ministry in Galilee encompasses the vast majority of everything he says and does in the miracles, right? So this is going to be important. But there is a contrast between Jerusalem and Galilee that you kind of want to keep in mind. Yes, Mike.
As you're teaching here through chronologically, I was just wondering if in my chronological Bible, if we were going to hit on the fact that between him healing the government official's son and teaching with authority in Capernaum, some fishermen follow Jesus.
No, we're not going to, because you're reading out of John, and John is not arranged entirely chronologically.
No, they have it in between what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so we're actually, so Luke is the one that we're going to, I know it says chronological Life Bible. I get that.
So did this
When
happen
we-
right about that time? Or?
No, not quite at that time, no. So what's going to happen here? So for instance, Matthew chapter 8. No, Bible's not wrong. Remember, hold on a second, hold on. 4 Gospels, only one of them claims to write it in chronological order, and that's Luke. The rest of them don't. In fact, the rest of them flip-flop. In fact, what we're going to find out here is that Matthew, we're going to go all the way from Matthew 4 all the way to Matthew 8. And then we're going to go back again because we haven't even gotten to Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, which is the Sermon on the Mount. So Matthew's not laid out chronologically. It's semi-chronological, but it flip-flops dates and stuff. We're going by Luke. So we're going to get to that part later, but that's the difference. Hey, Jeff, welcome. All right, just some quick contrast here between Jerusalem and Galilee. First of all, Galilee is going to be his primary place, like I've mentioned. It will be the place where he gets the most acceptance, right? He's going to get a lot of rejection in Jerusalem. He gets a lot of acceptance in Galilee, although that will turn, and he'll start to see that turn into rejection from some major groups. But overall, he receives much better acceptance in Galilee than he does in Jerusalem. Of course, Jerusalem, in contrast, will be the place where he's rejected and where he will be sentenced to death. So you kind of think of Galilee and Jerusalem as sort of two different areas of his life, right? And we'll see this contrast going throughout the Gospels. When he's in Jerusalem, you're going to see that he gets a lot of opposition. When he's in Galilee, he'll get some, but he definitely gets quite a bit of acceptance in that area. So sort of these two contrasting cities of Jerusalem and then the region of Galilee. All right. So he's now settled in Capernaum. We're all good. This is where he set up his ministry. We're all good with that. We're going to go into his next one now, where he's going to show, he's already shown his authority to heal. He did that with the nobleman. Remember, he healed him from a distance, the nobleman's son. He healed him from a distance. So he's already shown his authority to heal, which got everybody talking. Now he's going to show his authority over demons, right? That's the next thing that he's going to demonstrate here. So we've got kind of 2 Gospels that record this. And I'm just going to read through Mark's here, but I do want to read kind of the difference between Mark and Luke. This is why seeing these side by side, we get extra information. We're actually looking at the synoptic account side by side. So Mark chapter 1, verse 21 through 28, it says, "And they went into Capernaum," that's Jesus and his disciples, "and immediately on the Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and was teaching. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority and not as the scribes." Just as a convention here, remember, I highlight the things that are different between them. So Mark talks about it as he has authority, not as the scribes. Luke leaves that out. So anything that's highlighted in yellow is showing you the difference between that account and any of the other synoptics that we have there. So it says that he taught as one who has authority and not as the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. Okay, in fact, we're actually going to see the next incident happens as a result of this right here. This exorcism will then create the very next event, right? So these things are going to be tightly connected. Now we see here in Luke, in addition to what Mark has provided, Luke says that when the demon had thrown him down in their midst, in other words, he caused this man to be thrown down, to convulse. When he was thrown down, he came out of him having done him no harm. Right, so we have Luke adding that the demon didn't do him any harm, even though he threw him down and had him convulsing. And then also, Luke says that it was with authority and power he commands unclean spirits. Not just that he commands them, but that he commanded them with this sense of authority and power that was evident to everybody. So when you hear people talk about Jesus and they want to make him out to be this like traveling hippie who's just a good teacher and a moralist and blah, 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 like they haven't read the Bible. Like this is a person who's demonstrating he's not just teaching you to do good things. He's not just trying to be a person that's trying to help us to become our best selves, right? Live your best life, right? I think there's a book out there like that. He's not trying to do that. He is God, and he demonstrates himself in a very powerful way that he has authority over everything, right? And that's what we're going to see here. So we start out here by, again, the situation is they went down into Capernaum, and this is just after that healing of the governing official or the nobleman's son, right? And I noted here that there's no doubt that when they get to Capernaum, the nobleman and his family have already communicated much to the people in Capernaum. Remember, because it said the nobleman went back, his son was healed, and then what happened to his family? The nobleman's family, what happened? They all came to belief, right? So in other words, he's healed him, and so by the time Christ and his disciples get there, there's been this report about all that Christ has done. He's healed them by a distance. So he's coming now to the same town where the nobleman was from. And of course, it says here, now here's one of the kind of interesting things, is that Jesus, it says his practice was to go into the synagogue on the Sabbath. So he actually followed Judaism of that day, right? He wasn't like everyone thinks he's some sort of a revolutionary. No, he was a revolutionary when it came to the Pharisaic laws, the things the Pharisees demanded people do for righteousness' sake that weren't God's plan. He was a revolutionary against that, but he wasn't like this counter-revolutionary against everything. And like some people don't want to paint Jesus as this revolutionary to society, right? He's basically Antifa in some sort of a religious form. You know what I'm talking about? Like that's what they want to paint him. No. Jesus was a Jew. He observed most of the Jewish stuff that every other Jew did, including going to the Sabbath, right? And so we see this on a regular basis. Even Paul goes to the synagogue, right? So it's not as if they've rejected society to sort of create this new thing that is different, right? Now, what we see here is that Mark, of course, this will follow with Mark. Mark's gospel is very short, right? 16 chapters, right? And Mark his theme is Jesus the Messiah, the what? The servant of, and remember, the servant of Jehovah. Mark is written to the Romans, and he's trying to demonstrate that a servant can rapidly get things done. So what you're going to see here in Mark is this repetition of stuff. Jesus did this, Jesus did this, Jesus did this, he did this, and on and on. And it's like immediately. In fact, you'll see things like immediately, forthwith, straight away. That is like very common in Mark. He wants to give you the sense of this action being completed very quickly, because that's what a servant does. But Mark doesn't record very much of what Jesus says, right? So kind of want you to set you up that as you read Mark, you're going to get a lot of details about certain things that happen, but not a lot about his teaching, right? You're going to get most of that from Luke, Matthew, and then also, of course, the major discourses that are recorded in the Gospel of John. All right. Now it says here that he was teaching. So he went in the Sabbath, the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he's teaching again. He's standing up. He's reading from the scroll again, right? We don't know what part he's reading from. We don't know if he's reading the Torah portion. We don't know if he's reading the last part of the Torah portion and then the prophets. We don't know, but he's expounding, just like everyone that would get up, you'd have to read, and then you would expound on what that would mean. He's getting up and he's doing his teaching in the synagogue. And what he's teaching now is astounding them. So he's saying things they've never heard before. He's saying things about the scripture that they're not hearing from the local rabbi, right? They're not hearing from the other people, and they're astounded at his teaching. And here's the reason why. They're astounded at his teaching because what? He taught them as one who had authority and not as the scribes. So what does that mean there? Like, How's it different? Like I'm standing up here teaching, and Mike, you get up here and you start teaching. What's the difference? No difference there. The scribes, just so you know, the scribes are a part of the Pharisees, but they are like the ultra Pharisee. They are the legal experts. So what you had is you had the Pharisees, who were required to memorize the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, but the scribes then, they would go on, they would many times memorize the entire Old Testament, and they were the ones then that would be responsible for interpreting all of these thousands of Pharisaic laws that were out of the Old Testament. So they were the lawyers. They were the ones that could pass judgment on someone for not keeping something. So if you think about the Pharisees, the scribes are the worst of them all, right? They're the worst. They're the lawyers that are going to hold your feet to the fire.
And not like the scribes, but like the one who actually wrote it.
Well, let me explain to you the difference here. So Jesus teaches with authority and power, not like the scribes. So what does that mean here? Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple quotes here, and then we'll sort of debrief that, because it's important to understand, why are they astonished? Like, why is it when Christ stands up, it's not just the content, but there's something about how he conveys himself that people are just taken aback. They're literally astonished. It's the idea of being out of your mind with like awe, it being perplexed, being just taken back about what is happening here. So what is that? So here we go. Let me give you a quote here from Arnold, and I'll give you a quote from Dobb here. It says, as Yeshua's reputation spread, it led to debate. The question was by what authority he was teaching the people. They were impressed with the content of his teaching and marveled at the authority with which he taught. Oh, that should be taught. Rabbis received their authority from the academy they attended, right? So in other words, you attended a certain rabbinic school, that's where you got your authority. And whenever you read, in fact, if you've noticed the quotes I've had up here from the rabbinic writings, they almost always say something like, Rabbi so-and-so said in the name of Rabbi so-and-so, whatever. So in other words, it's not my authority, but the rabbi I was taught by gave me this authority. So they don't ever teach on your own. In fact, you were not allowed to teach under your own authority. You had to give the credit to the rabbi who taught you, or the rabbinic school. So what is going on here is that Christ isn't giving anybody any credit for it. He doesn't say, he's not standing up and saying, Rabbi so-and-so has said this about the book of Isaiah. He's just telling you this is the book of Isaiah and this is what it means. And he's interpreting himself, and he is claiming the authority for that interpretation. And that shocks them because they haven't heard that. You're not allowed to do that. You must. Who are you to say that? By the way, we know you haven't gone to school. Okay, so think about this, right? This would be like, some professor in, let's say physics, PhD in physics, and he's telling you about how the world operates and gravity and this kind of stuff. And then you got someone like me, graduates from high school, and I'm over here and I'm standing up and I'm talking about all of this stuff, and people want to know, well, why should I believe you? Where'd you go to school? I didn't go to school. I graduated from high school. What physics class did you take? I didn't take any physics class. Well, so-and-so, physics professor over here with his PhD says the opposite of what you're saying. Like, you don't have any authority, but you're teaching as if you do, right? It's shocking. Can you understand the scene here? Really shocking what is actually going on here. Okay, so anyway, the rabbis received their authority from the academy they attended. Example, Rabbi so-and-so in the name of Rabbi so-and-so said, right? Yeshua never studied in a rabbinic academy. What then was the source of his authority? The people recognized that he was teaching something new and that he taught them as having authority in himself. Unlike the scribes, he did not require previous rabbinic authorization. His teaching and authority came from above, from the Father. So they're just really, it's not only the content, but it's this guy right here. He's got some, what do you call it, chutzpah, or he's got some moxie, right? He's not like the other people, all right? Now, Dobbs says this, he says, when it says later on here in the account that they said, is this a new teaching with authority? Well, what that is referencing is Christ is teaching, and he's teaching something different. And they're wondering, like, wait, if this is a new teaching, where's the authority behind that? Because anytime a new teaching would come up, it would be, ratified by the rabbinic school and everything else. You'd have that. But here he's teaching new things. He's got no authority, and there's no rabbinic school behind the new teaching. He's given us new information, a new way to interpret and look at the scriptures, and he's doing it with authority, but he doesn't have any authority to do that. That's the question. Does that all make sense? Okay, so that's what it's talking about here. So Dobbs says this. He says, a new teaching with authority may mean a new rule which only an ordained rabbi was entitled to lay down. Jesus did deliver decisions classified as new rules, new halachot, as when he defended his disciples who plucked corn on a Sabbath. Even the type of argument he used from a precedent set by David is by no means foreign to the Talmud. So he's actually creating new rules. He's basically saying, no, you're not right. God only said, that on the Sabbath, you're supposed to rest, right? That's what you're supposed to do. Keep the Sabbath holy by resting. The rabbis made 1,000 rules about the Sabbath, and Christ says, no, I'm making a new one over here that's not yours. And guess what? I get to make it because I'm the one who laid down the original rule about the Sabbath, right?
What he's saying is found in scripture, the
Yes.
Old Testament.
Yep.
So if they knew that, I mean, it's not like he's adding anything.
Well, the difference
They
is,
just don't like the way he's saying it.
no. The difference here is just this specific instance right here. So the rabbi said, you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day of rest, right? Okay. They created over 1,000 laws about the Sabbath. One of them was you couldn't pluck kernels of wheat from the wheat stalk or corn or whatever it was. Usually it's wheat or barley. You couldn't do that if you were hungry and crush it into your hand and then eat it, right? And the reason for that is because when you pluck, you've worked, you've harvested. And when you've ground it up to get rid of the chaff, you've milled it, right? So in the process of you just taking a few of these little kernels off here because you're hungry, like Jesus and his disciples were, they said, you cannot do that because that's working on the Sabbath. You've broken God's law. So they took God's law to rest on the Sabbath and they made all these other ones. So Christ is making a new one that's contrary to their rabbinic laws, not to the biblical law. Does that make sense? Okay, that's what's going on here.
I'm gonna read what the NLT says.
Yeah, hold on just a second. Let me get you that mic.
In Mark 1:21-28, 22, the NLT says that the people were amazed at his teaching, for he taught with real authority, quite unlike the teachers of the religious law.
That's right, because their authority was all derived. They derived their authority from somebody else. Christ is not deriving his authority from anybody. He's just speaking authoritatively. He derives it from himself. He's God, he created the law, right? So he has the authority to do it. That's what takes them back so much in this particular setting, right? Now, again, he says that they were amazed. And this word exaplazanto just means astounded, but it's more than that. It's the idea of being like struck out of their senses. Like when they're listening to him, they lost it. Like they don't know what to do with it. Like they're not just like, oh, that's kind of curious. Oh my, I want to think about that more. I mean, he is shocking the daylights out of them. This is a very, very rich word that's used here about their level of amazement about what's going on with Jesus and his teaching. So that's the scene here that's going on, right? And then what it says down here in John Grasmick, he says this, he says, Jesus's authority contrasted sharply with the teachers of the law, literally scribes, who were schooled in the written law and its oral interpretation. Their knowledge was derived from scribal tradition, so they simply quoted the sayings of their predecessors. Jesus doesn't do that. All right. So he's teaching. They are amazed. They're on pins and needles waiting for the next thing he's going to say. And in the midst of that, and it says, and immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. Now, it's not clear whether or not he came in during the service while Christ is teaching, or he's in the synagogue and because of Christ's teaching, the incident happens. Okay. It's not super clear which one of those is. I happen to think it's probably more likely the second, where he's there, and because of what is being taught, the demon inside this man cannot control it any longer. He's got to get out of there. Like the demon doesn't want to come in. The reason why I think it's the man was already there versus the man coming into it is because the demon knows who Christ is. They don't want anything to do with him. Anytime there's an encounter between Christ and the demons, what do they want? They want to get away as fast as they can because they're afraid he's going to destroy him, annihilate him. That's their fear every time. So it says, and immediately there was in their synagogue a man. So did the man come into the synagogue while Christ was teaching? Or was he in the synagogue already while Christ was teaching? And because of what Christ was teaching, it caused so much distress in the demon that the demon acted out. And of course, that became evident to everybody. I think it's a second one because I don't see any other circumstance where demons want to have anything to do with this. In fact, this demon himself says, have you come to destroy us? So I don't think the first option is realistic. I think the second option is Christ is teaching, and because he's teaching with power and authority, that man and that demon cannot sit there any longer. They are like, they can't stand in the presence of God. Just think about that. His power and authority is so great, they cannot handle anymore. They got to leave. They've got to flee from the presence of the master, right? So we get this immediately. There's a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, what have you to do with this Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God, right? Now, interestingly enough, demons use the vocal cords of the person they possess. Now, this is going to become really important, right? Because later on, there's going to be a demon-possessed man that Christ heals that is deaf and dumb and can't speak. And when he heals that person, it causes such an uproar, and we'll get to Matthew chapter 12 and 13. So if you want to read about it, Matthew chapter 12 and 13. But this man can't talk. So you can't exorcise that demon, because the demon, the way that the rabbis would do it is you'd have to get communication with the demon. What is your name? And the demon would say what their name was. And then you would use ritual incantations to call that demon out. Okay, demon Ben Tamalion, come out. So you'd have to be able to communicate with the demon, and they would tell you their name, right? And the demon, of course, uses the vocal cords of the individual. That's the reason why the man cries out, what do you have to do with this? But of course, it's the demon that has possessed him that is actually using the vocal cords of the person that he has possessed here, right? Now, this question, what have you to do with us, is actually a Hebrew idiom, and you can find this idiom used in different ways in those passages that I've said there. And basically, the Hebrew idiom is two aggressing or opposing groups or people. If you're like, what do you have to do with me? If you're like one army or another, it's like, what do you have to do with us? Like this is an oppositional question. It's not an interrogative question. Like, I want to know, like, hey, you're here. Can you give me more information about why you've showed up? This is an antagonistic thing of two opposing forces, right? And you see that throughout scriptures of this Hebrew idiom. What do you have to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth, right? Now, it says, have you come to destroy us? Now, actually, the Greek is stronger than that. It's not really in a question form. It should be, you have come into the world to destroy us, right? Jesus of Nazareth, what do they have you to do to? You have come into the world to destroy us. And the word there for destroy is apolomi, and it means destruction, complete total destruction. It means annihilation, right? So they're asking him, what do you have to do with us? Are you here to destroy us at this point? So the fear of every demon that Jesus comes in contact with is this it? The master of the universe is here. Is my time up? And they even request later on to let us go into the herd of pigs, right? Don't destroy it, right? That idea there that they recognize who he is, and they know, what do they know about Christ? What's the one thing that he can do to them if he wants to? Destroy him, annihilate him. Don't destroy me. Yes. Have you come, like right now, is this your time? Which is why I don't think the man came into the synagogue. I think he was already there, right? And what does he say here, right? He says, actually, before I get to that, there is one other thing I wanted to make sure I pointed out here. Notice the demon says, what have you to do with us? Now, there's a couple ways to read that. It's plural, obviously. So it could be that there's more than one demon in this man, right? He might have multiple demons in there, which was not uncommon. But the other option, which I think is probably just as likely, is that the demon is speaking for the demonic realm. That this is the first time that Christ has exorcised demons. And so now that Christ has come on the scene, he's announced who he is, he's done all this stuff. And now there's a confrontation, and the demon's wondering, is this it? The Messiah has come. Is this the end? Like, we knew the end was coming sometime. And we've been fearing it from day one. Since we sinned against God, we've been fearing it day one. Has our time as the demonic realm come to an end? Is the Messiah coming? He's going to wipe us out. Right? So it could be either multiple demons, or it could be a reference to him being representative of the entire demonic realm, which I think is probably the second one is probably more likely, right?
Jewish leaders, I don't know, the priests, did they actually exorcise
Yes.
demons? They did?
Yep. In fact, it was not uncommon for the rabbis to do exorcisms. In fact, in Matthew chapter 12 and 13, when Christ cast out the demon from the deaf and dumb man, and they accuse him then of casting out demons by the power of Beelzebub, what is his response to him? What's one of his areas of defense? He says, by what means do your disciples do it? In other words, the Pharisees cast out demons as well. So God allowed, for whatever reason, God allowed them also to practice exorcisms, and they cast out. So that's what Christ is. He's not denying the fact that they were able to do it. He just wants to know by what authority. And so we'll get to that. It's very interesting. All right. Something really important here to keep in mind is demons immediately know who Christ is. They call him here the Holy One of God. The Holy One of God. This is a deific title, the Holy One of God. Not just a good man, not just a powerful person, whatever else, but I know who you are. The reason why they know who he is because they know him. They were there with him in heaven before they fell. They know exactly who they're dealing with. Demons recognize who Christ is, and guess what? They recognize his authority. When he says to get out, guess what they do? They get out. People are less likely to recognize who he is, right? So his greatest adversaries know exactly who he is, knows what power he is. Sometimes as people, we just we want to live for ourselves, and we are slow to either recognize who he is or slow to bring ourselves into obedience to him, right?
Just hear that, but in every case where demons confronted Jesus, they lost their power. In every case.
Every case. I mean, and we'll go through all of them. That's why I said, every time he shows up, all they want to do is get out of there. And they recognize who he is. And by his authority, they must leave. Like, they've got no authority. They got zero power. Remember, we talked about last week, the writer of Hebrews in Hebrews chapter 1 talks about Christ upholding the whole universe in his power. They're part of the entire created universe. So the only reason why the demon exists is because Christ allows them to exist. I mean, it just goes back to what I've told you before. All he has to do is say, excuse me, you don't exist anymore. And guess what? Poof, they're gone. So it's not just that you've got two opposing forces, like the football game that's going on right now, where you've got kind of the big bully and you've got kind of like the little guy on the block, and you know the big guy's going to win because he's just bigger. Like, you've got a force, and then you've got no force over here because they are completely powerless. All their power is derived from what God allows them to have. It's all derived power. None of that power exists in themselves. Right? So you're right. They've got zero power every time they interact with them. Yeah, Mike.
Can I read this? Just
Sure.
a little blurb about demons. Add to the content. Evil spirits or demons are ruled by Satan. They work to tempt people to sin. They are not created by Satan because God is the creator of all. Rather, they are fallen angels who join Satan in his rebellion. Though not all disease comes from Satan, demons can cause a person to become mute, deaf, blind, or insane. But in every case where demons confront Jesus, they lost their power. Thus, God limits the evil spirit what they can do. They can do nothing without his permission, what we just said. During Jesus's life on earth, demons were allowed to be very active to demonstrate once and for all Christ's power and authority over them.
That's beautiful. I mean, exactly there. The only thing that they can do is what God allows them to do. Think back onto Job and Satan. Satan couldn't do anything unless God told him, hey, you can do this, but you can't go any further. Then Satan goes out and does it. But until God lets him do it, Satan can't go out and do anything to Job. Job's protected. You're protected. You're protected. And God, if something happens to you and it is the result of demonic attack, let's say an illness or something like that, it's only because God has allowed that. So we don't have to worry about Satan because we know that God's there. It's like, you can go this far and no further. We don't have to worry about being overrun by the enemy because he's powerless in regards to God, right? God controls the whole thing.
But you know, it's interesting what you said. That demons can recognize who Jesus is, but we can't.
We are
Is that
slow to
what you said?
recognize.
So what?
We're slow. We are slow to
Slow
recognize.
recognize.
We're slow. I mean, part of the reason why that, you know, demons were there in heaven with them, right? They weren't demons at the time. They weren't fallen angels. They know who he is.
They're part of the spiritual realm, and it
Yeah.
takes one to know who would recognize.
But they recognize that the problem is so they've got, Rich, they've got a little bit of extra knowledge, which is why, you know, what, I mean, people talk about, well, why can't angels be redeemed? Well, I think the Bible doesn't say actually. My belief on that is because they committed a sin so horrible because they were created by him and were in heaven. They know exactly who he is. And yet they rebelled against him. We sometimes have a really clouded picture of ourselves and the world and who God is. And so I'm not saying that we get a little bit more grace, but we are created in his image, and angels are not. That's probably the main reason why we are redeemed and they're not. But I think another reason is God says, look, what you've done is completely inexcusable from an angelic realm because you know who I am. And anyway, I won't get off. This is just my perspective. So take it or leave it.
Different purpose.
Okay. So anyway, they recognize who he is. And then notice what Christ says. He says, but Jesus rebuked him, saying, be silent and come out of him. And when the demon had thrown him down in their midst, he came out of him, having done him no harm, right? Now notice, when the demons recognize who Christ is, and they offered up, we know who you are the Holy One of God. You are God. When they offer that affirmation of him, what does Christ do every time? He tells them to what? Shut up. Be silent. Okay? And because, probably two reasons. We're not told why, but I think the two obvious reasons for this is, number one, what is going on here? And Mike, you actually hinted at this, that the extra demonic activity, you think about the Old Testament, you get almost no demonic activity in the Old Testament. You get some, but it's really sparse. Like, you wouldn't really know a whole lot about demonic activity just by reading the Old Testament. There's not a lot of it. At least it's not called out explicitly like it is. But all of a sudden you get to the Gospels and man, it's all over the place, right? And that's because the Messiah is there and Satan is going to oppose him as much as he can. So you get all this extra demonic activity. But also, Mike, like you'd mentioned, part of what I think is going on here is that God allows that demonic activity, these demonic possessions and things to go on so that Christ can demonstrate his authority over Satan, to show that he is the ultimate power in the universe, right? So to take this recognition from them would defeat the purpose. Like, I don't need you guys to confirm who I am because I'm going to defeat you, right? I think the other thing is that demons they don't make very good character witnesses. Like, I don't need I don't need a demon to tell everyone else who I am, because that's not exactly the witness I want to who I am, my character, and my authority. All right. So his authority here, when he rebukes him, this shows that, in fact, God's rule has come. That's important to know right here, is that Christ has offered himself as the Messiah of Israel, right? And now he's demonstrating this, and he's demonstrating that as the Messiah, he has authority even over the demonic realm. So as we go through these next phases here, just think about, what is he doing? He's building his resume. I am the Messiah. I'm going to show you all this stuff, and then what are you going to do with it? Right? That's part of what's going on
Pretty
here.
powerful demonstration of the school of rabbis that he came from, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
You want to read everything?
Yeah. So there's an interesting word here that's used, and I'm going to come back to this later on, right? But it says that, Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him," right? So he reprimanded him, epitimason, got to get the E right. He reprimanded him for his affirmation and commanded him to come out of the man. Now, the word "be silent" there is this Greek word, which means to be muzzled or silent. Okay, so he's basically saying, be muzzled. In other words, you can no longer talk. Now, it's super interesting that this word is used again in the gospel accounts. Now, remember when Jesus and his disciples are out on the boat and they're out in the storm and the winds and the waves, that storm comes down and the winds are howling. What does he do? He speaks to the wind and the waves. He speaks to nature. And what does he say? Be still. Be silent. It's the same word, be muzzled. And so the connection between Christ muzzling the demonic forces is where, when we get to that account, it isn't just a natural storm. The storm is a demonic storm intended to kill Jesus and his disciples. And he speaks to the creators of that storm, the demons, with the same word, be muzzled, be silent. And what happens? Immediately what happens? The wind and the waves what? Okay, same thing that we have here, the same word, be muzzled or be silenced. All right. So again, the demons don't have any ability to withstand him because they don't have any choice. They can't argue. And so with a loud scream, the demon leaves him. He throws him to the ground, convulses him, and then he leaves, right? And of course, Luke, being the doctor that he is, adds a little bit more info to say, oh, by the way, just so you know, Christ didn't say, come out, and the man came out and then the demon came out and threw the man to the ground. The man hit his head and split his head open and bled to death, right? I mean, it even shows the power of Christ to protect the man once the demon tries to convulse him and throw him to the ground. So the demon's going to be like, if you're going to send me out of here, I'm going to do as much damage as I can. He tries to damage and hurt the individual, and it says that no harm came to him. Like, there's an additional miracle there of God's grace to this man that has now experienced this exorcism.
Does have to be present to protect them?
Does Jesus have to
Does
be
Jesus
present?
have to be where Jesus is present? Demons cannot stay long. So does he have to be present so they come and attack him in the synagogue?
Mhm.
And he says, get lost, and then they come out of the guy.
Yeah.
And he's okay.
Mhm.
So does he have to be present in order to protect us? Because
Great.
if he's not here, we can be harmed by them?
No, great question. That's a really great question. All right. And let me answer that. No. Okay. While he's here on Earth, though, wherever he comes, he's like the magnet that, what is the North Pole and South Pole, or the two South Poles or North Poles? I can't look, I'm not a physicist, right? The poles like push each other apart. Where he comes, they got to move away, right? When he's physically present, you see that. But going back to the Old Testament, you see, going back again to Job, Jesus isn't there with Job, right? So God has control. Like, he doesn't have to be physically present. But in believers, guess what he is? He is what? He's present. So Christ does reside in you. So it doesn't matter that, his body's not coming out, but he does reside in you. So yeah. All right. Well, I just came up with it on the fly, Mike. I've never been, I did. No, I did. I've never been asked that question before, but thanks. That's good. All right. anyway, so we get this is the first exorcism that we have, and we see that there's just this constant conflict between and Mike, I'm glad you pointed out that there does seem to be this incredible increase in demonic activity that we see. And even a little bit in the book of Acts and stuff, but in comparison to that, the gospel times when Christ is physically here, it seems like it is much more than that. All right. Okay. So Jesus not only teaches with authority, but it says here that he cast them out with authority, right? And they obey him. Now, here's what Bach says. He says this, he says, a comparison of the exorcism of Jesus with the accounts of other ancient exorcists shows that Jesus introduced a dimension of unique personal authority that seems to make the confrontation one between him and the demon. In most cases, a word from him was all that was needed, in contrast to the more involved actions from a normal healer or exorcist. So, yes, the Pharisees did do exorcisms, but they were usually long and convoluted ritual. They required the gathering of the name of the demon that was to be cast out. And here we see Jesus' word, get out. That's it. And they're like, what? That's it? You're not going to throw holy water. Sorry, that's the Catholic tradition wasn't around back then. So you're not going to do some, get some smoke and whatever else. You're not going to do some incantations. It's like he just tells them to go and they go, right? And the thing is that it appears like it is just like it's between you and I.
That's what's interesting, because Jesus, he knows them by name. He knows exactly who they are.
So he doesn't need to find out their
He
name.
created them.
Yeah.
The same way they know exactly who he is. That's
Yeah, and the rabbis wouldn't be exercising him in their own authority. They'd be exercising him in God's authority. Whereas Christ doesn't need to appeal to anybody. He just says, get out. So there's a difference even in his authority to exercise demons, right? Okay. All right, so basically he's cast him out here, and then what it says here, and it says at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. Well, no duh. I mean, that's a statement, right? Like, that's exactly what you would expect. All of a sudden, he's cast this demon out. Not only has been teaching with authority, but from there, everyone just leaves and they are going all around Galilee talking about what Christ has done. Now, what's going to happen is this is the Sabbath. What's going to happen in the evening, right when the Sabbath ends, the same day, there's going to be a completely new miracle that happens, but it happens because of what Christ has done early in the morning. All right, so those two events are going to be connected. Yes, Jeff.
Well, I was reading in Luke and what his account was. And so the people in the synagogue, they were all amazed and said to one another, what is this word? For with the authority and power he commands the unclean spirits. So were they not familiar with the word that Jesus uses to command the demon down, the same word that he used to calm the sinner?
No, it's actually like a new teaching or new authority. Like what is this? What is this you're doing? Like, we've seen exorcisms before, and we've seen how the rabbis have done it, and how they've asked the name, and how they've gone through this sort of this ritual to do it. And you're not only just teaching us with authority, but you're also casting out with authority. You just say, go, get out. And they go, and they're like, whoa, hold on a second here. What about all the pomp and circumstance? Where's all the, like I said, where's all the smoke and mirrors? None of that exists. Christ just says, get out, leave, and they go. And they're just like, we have never seen that. We've seen exorcism before, but it isn't anything like that, right? So there's a big difference here. All right. So let's go. Actually, I'm going to probably won't get to the second one tonight. We'll save that, but I'll tie it in next week. So demonology and rabbinic theology. The rabbis rightly believed in demons and angels, right? Right. The Sadducees didn't, but the Pharisees believed in the presence of demons and angels. So they had some beliefs, and we'll get to how some of this impacts later on as we go through it. But they believed that demons were actually created on the sixth day of creation. Well, that's not the biblical account, of course. Demons, they were angels that were created first, and they fell. And we can get into that with the fall of Ezekiel, that Ezekiel records with Satan. But they believe they were created on the sixth day of creation. And they also believed that demons, oddly enough, couldn't see angels. And when I say angels, I mean ministering angels, I mean godly angels. They couldn't see God. So they could see each other and they could see men, but they couldn't see these angels, which is why if they're going to get into a fight with an angel, the angel's got the upper hand because they can't see him. Pretty limited, right? So they had a limited view of their power. Of course, that's not a biblical view. That's just a rabbinic view of that. Interestingly enough, demons could exist anywhere, but they had these special places where you really had to be careful, right? Like you got this really interesting story about this demon that was in this vat, and this was placed underneath this drain pipe, and the vat exploded, and so the demon must have been in the drain pipe to cause it to. So they exploded anyway. There's a really interesting story about how they come up with some of these things, but drain pipes, stay away from drain pipes because demons like to hang out in drain pipes. So you might want to stay away from the corner of your house, especially when it's raining. Don't let the demon come down your drain pipe. Water. No, I'm being Rich. No, of course I'm not being serious. No. I'm just joking here, Rich. Water, demons were definitely fond of water. So a lot of bodies of water, things like that. Abandoned ruins. So like if you had like a castle or a fort or even a house that was abandoned, demons really like to hang out in those places, vacant houses. And believe it or not, outhouses, right? Which that actually seems like the most appropriate place, right? Is the outhouse. So these are some places that demons would go. Now, actually, that shouldn't be 6, it should be 7. I apologize. The rabbis attributed 7 characteristics to demons. 4 are shared by angels and 3 with humans. The characteristics they share with humans is they can eat and drink, right? And we do actually see that with even with angels. Remember, Christ comes down, the theophany with other angels that are there, and they eat with Abraham, right? Eat and drink, right? They can eat and drink. They can procreate, right? Which is why in Genesis 6, what you have in Genesis 6, right, is the sexual union between demons and human women that create this giant race, this race. And that is what then results in God having to wipe that out. It's not just a condemnation of mankind, it's a condemnation of mankind and a wiping out of this progeny of this sexual relationship between angels and between women. Now, we don't talk about much about this here, but angels clearly can take on, I mean, angels in the sense of fallen and ministering angels, they can take on bodily form and do bodily functions. Now, what we see here in the New Testament is that the angels that did this in Genesis 6. So why doesn't this happen now? Well, because God, not only did he destroy the world with a flood to get rid of it, but then he locked those angels that committed that in Tartarus. Tartarus is a place of not hell, but it's a place of in Sheol, where in fact it's mentioned in the New Testament, where these angels are kept permanently locked up. So from the time of Genesis 6, those angels that committed the act are in prison. So the rest of the angels don't want to, sorry, the rest of the demons, they don't want to be locked up. So that's why they don't do it anymore, because they know that God isn't going to stand for that kind of nonsense, right? So this procreation. So I'm getting way off the beaten path here, but anyway, sorry. Angels can die, they can cease to exist. Right, that was the belief. I mean, they're created beings, so and they're upheld only by God's grace to have them continue to exist. But they can actually die and be annihilated.
Demons don't die. They just go live in Democrats. That's why.
Oh, geez, Mike,
Democrats.
Mike, this is being recorded.
Oh.
Jeez. Scratch that, everyone that's listening, scratch this. We are a Bible study group that is neither Republican nor Democratic. We are followers of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Okay, let's go on with that.
That's all.
It's not a saying in this Bible study. All right. Okay, share with angels, share with ministering angels. So this is where demons and the good angels, this is the things they have together. They have wings. They all fly all over the world from one to the other. They know the future. They know what's going to happen, although they're not omniscient, but they do have a good idea of what the future is going to hold. And of course, they can change their appearance and their form, which we see that in the Old Testament. So that should not surprise us about those characteristics that rabbis attributed to them. Okay. A few other things here that we've got. Demons could cause physical and also mental illness. Although, as we're going to find out here with the healing of Peter's mother-in-law, that's the next thing we're going to come to, that demons are not responsible for all sickness. They can cause some, but they're not responsible for all. And unfortunately, in the church, there have been some groups out there that will claim that every illness is because of a demon. In fact, they'll claim that just like there's certain medicines that will heal certain illnesses, there are certain demons. There's a demon of cancer. There's a demon of pneumonia. And so basically, if you can identify what the right demon is, you can cast it out, right? Which is just a bunch of nonsense. But anyway, they can cause some physical and mental illness. And so they were right there. They also believe that demons welcomed the wicked in Sheol and Hades. So when the wicked went down there, they were greeted by these demons. Yay, that's the, what they call the welcome wagon. That's what it used to be called when I was a kid, the welcome wagon. Now, if you wanted to keep away from demonic possession, we got some really good ones for you. This is what the rabbi said, some really good ones for you. Number one, wash your hands, because the demons would actually kind of stay on your hands like overnight. And if you didn't wash them, particularly in the morning, the demons could be on your hands. And of course, you could become sort of possessed. So wash your hands in the morning. And of course, wash your hands before meals and things like that. So Christ is actually going to get called out in his disciples for not washing their hands before eating. Okay. Really important to wash your hands, because that's typically where demons will reside, is unwashed hands. So again, some of this theology they have becomes important when we see the different conflicts between Christ and the Pharisees. Eating bread in the morning would keep, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, I guess, a loaf of, holly in the morning keeps the demon away. Studying the Torah would, right? Because the God's word has the power, and when it's being studied, the demons don't want to be around that. Reciting the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4-6. So you've got the Shema there. If you repeat that on a regular basis, that will keep demons away. And then the Sabbath itself prevented demons. So on the Sabbath, demons didn't really operate much. They were really confined because God wouldn't really allow them to move. So it's sort of like on the Sabbath, they kind of got frozen, like wherever they're at, like they couldn't get away from that area. So the Sabbath prevented not necessarily all demonic activity, but they couldn't just roam free, right? So notice that the demoniac that we have, he was cast out, the demon was cast out on what day? Sabbath. So the Sabbath doesn't completely protect you from demonic activity, as Christ has just shown him. Again, some of these little things kind of get you to see what's going on differently. You've got a demonic man who is acting out on the Sabbath, and Christ heals him, and yet the Sabbath was supposed to protect people from demonic activity. So some of these things, you can see why people are like, wow, like what's going on here is like super cool. Like we haven't seen this before. Okay, yeast. That's forget that last bullet there. All right. There were some differences again between Christ and the rabbis. Again, Christ just gives them a word. It says with a word he commanded them to come out. That's it, a word. They had to go through these kind of ritualistic types of things. We mentioned some of the stuff, and we'll actually talk about a few more of those things when we get to specifically Matthew chapter 12 and 13. We'll talk more about kind of the demonic exorcism and more in depth, because it'll come into play in that particular story. But as I mentioned earlier, there is one type of demon that the rabbis could not exorcise, that they thought was impossible to exorcise. And that was a demon that was in a person who was deaf and dumb. And that's because two things. Number one, if they're deaf, they can't hear the command to come out. They can't communicate. Remember, the demon and the exorcist have to be able to communicate with each other. So if the person's deaf, they can't hear. So there's no communication. If they're dumb, it means they can't speak, they're mute. They can't communicate back. But the demon uses the human vessel as their communication tool. They use their vocal cords and their ears. So if the person is deaf and dumb, you can't communicate. So the rabbis could not cast out a demon in a person that was deaf and dumb. So when you read Matthew chapter 12 and 13, just as future homework, go read it and go look at the response of the people to that. In fact, the response to them and that miracle is greater than almost any other thing that he does. Like the conclusions that they come to when he does that are pretty astounding, right? Matthew chapter 12 and 13. Anyway, we do have that the Babylonian Talmud and Josephus give us some identification of some things that would happen in rabbinic exorcisms. And it says this comes from Gaze of Hermes. He says, Flavius Josephus provides the full description of an exorcism performed by a Jew called Eleazar and witnessed by the future emperor Vespasian, but he doesn't cite the formula itself. He doesn't give the actual wording that he used, the incantation that the Jew used to do that. But apparently the Vespasian witnessed a Jew using this formulaic way of doing exorcism. The Babylonian Talmud, in contrast, contains the words which the two renowned Tanaitic rabbis of the early 2nd century AD, Simon ben Yochai and Eleazar ben Yose, are said to have pronounced when expelling a named demon from the daughter of a Roman emperor. And this is what they said: Ben Tamalian, come out. Ben Tamalian, come out. And there's some other things that happen after that. But the language they use is they have to name the demon. Right? Again, important. The evangelists testify to Jesus using the normal Jewish exorcist terminology of come out, even though he doesn't use the additional rabbinic rituals to do that. Okay. I think we're going to end there for tonight because the next one is Jesus' authority over disease. So if you want to kind of get a little bit of a heads up on it, it's going to be where Jesus comes into Peter's house and heals Peter's mother-in-law. And this event is tied into what has just happened to the exorcism of the demonic man, right? They're tied in together. Some things happen here as a direct result of him casting out the demon. Questions or comments? Yeah.
Would you like to get to that?
I don't. It's probably more than. I mean, it's going to be more than just 5 minutes. Yeah. So I think I'll end it there, and yeah, that's fine. Because look, I don't have a need or desire to like race through anything. I'd rather it be good discussion. So I always like to try to find a good landing spot. We're not halfway in the middle of a story or comment. Yes, Rich.
So do you think that demons have the same presence in the world today that they did then? You think it's changed in any way?
Yeah, I do. I do. I mean, if you mean by presence, if you mean activity level, like, is that what you mean? Or do you mean like numbers of demons or what do you mean maybe?
Can I read a little blurb here to that?
Yeah, let me just make sure I
Let me-
understand
let
Rich's
me-
question
let me-
first.
let me- Well, I've had some difficulty with my son, who I think has exposed himself to unclean spirits, and I've actually had conversations with him where I'm not really sure who it is that's talking to me.
Mhm.
And so, we talk in very general terms about spiritual warfare and all that. And in the early church, it seemed like exorcism was I don't know, somewhat commonplace. Where they would go into, Jesus would go into places and cast demons out of people. Did the apostles have the same authority to cast out demons?
They do. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have authority to cast out demons?
We can, there are, in fact, one of my profs at Biola, his specialty is in demonology and the occult and the cults. And he's actually participated in exorcisms before. So do they happen today? Yes. Can you do them? Yes.
Yeah, and it's not so much that, I mean, for me, it's not really something I'm comfortable exposing myself to, actually. But, you know, it just seems like in the time in Jesus' ministry on earth and in the early church, that casting out demons seemed to be more, I don't know, commonplace, because it's almost like, you know, there were frequent accounts of Jesus casting out demons.
Yeah, and Mike, hang on to that just for a second. So let me just answer what I have, and then Mike, you've got something that you want to contribute to as well. Can I say definitively yes or no? No, I can't, because you know the Bible doesn't definitively say that. But I think what you can see is a tremendous uptick during the time and ministry of Christ as compared to the Old Testament, and even some of what we run into the New Testament after Christ is gone and the church is established. Like there does seem to be heightened accounts of exorcisms and demonic activity. Now, can I say that for certain? No. Now, do I believe that's probably true? Yeah, my own belief is that that's the case. And the reason why I hold to that is because Christ as the Messiah is here on earth, and Satan wants to destroy him. He's only got a certain amount of opportunity. He's got 3 years, basically. Well, he tried to destroy him when he was a baby. So he's got, let's say, 30 years, right? And then much time. So there's a ton of demonic activity going around at the time because of opposition to Christ. Now, again, all demonic oppression, opposition, sickness is something that God allows through his will. So even today, when someone's demon possessed, you know, that's by God's allowance of that to happen. And when people do open themselves up to that, for sure, that can happen. So, I mean, I don't know. I can't tell you for sure one way or another. I think that that's probably is true what I've said, but I'm not going to die on that hill or even go up the hill. I'll just stay at the bottom. And
You know, you also look at all these people today who are this trans thing, and you know, 600 different types of sexual identities, and I mean, that's all got to be demon possessed stuff. That all has to be, because God only created man and woman. What I was going to say to your question, Richard, is that in the book here it says, while we may not often see cases of demon possession today, it does still exist. There is no doubt that evil permeates our world. We need not be fearful. However, Jesus's power is far greater than Satan's. The first step towards conquering fear of evil is to recognize Jesus's authority and power. He has overcome all evil, including Satan himself. Again, it comes back to faith.
yeah,
Do
man.
we believe?
I mean, it says, you know, greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. So we don't need to fear. Now, does that mean that you want to go out and like, just like,
Go looking for it?
yeah, I mean, you don't, yeah, I mean, there are certainly people that's a ministry they have, and they're well prepared for that battle. They're well prepared for what they're going to encounter. And of course, anything that's sort of out of the ordinary, just in our own human nature, can be freaky, right? So I can understand just the desire to not be even around that. I totally get it. But I do think that there is definitely demon possession today. The world's population is great. So, I mean, it could be as many demon possessions or more just because of the expansion of the population. But even more than that, it's the influence of Satan in the world. That kind of demonic activity, I think we at least see more visibly, right? We see that more visibly than we do demonic activity. But I'm telling you right now, I know of people. I have a good friend of mine who has witnessed with his own eyes and ears demonic activity. So look, I know this stuff exists. I know it's real. We don't play around with it, or we don't we don't, try to negate it and say it's nothing. It's a significant issue, right? But we don't fear it.
Makes you kind of wonder, when people say, what would Jesus do? Well, Jesus is here, he's among us, but not physically. I mean, not in the form he was when he was alive. And it just seemed like, you just in feeling like I've had some, I don't know, not personal experience with it myself, but just an exposure to it. It's like, well, how nice would it be if Jesus would just come and just take the spirit that has afflicted, my son and free him from that. And I think other people that are in situations like that would empathize with
Totally.
sympathize with a statement like that.
I think
That's something, because like, in the type of drugs and things that are going on the street and, among the homeless and the drug addicted, it's almost like it's gone from, beyond just a drug, but something that, has actually, some spiritual domain that has control over people.
yeah, I would.
Is that a wrong way to think about it?
No, I mean, you can't go down to every homeless encampment and necessarily make that claim, but I think in general, that's probably right. Now, here's one thing to think about. Here's the frustrating thing about sometimes as believers. We read the New Testament accounts, and whatever Jesus touches turns to gold. What I mean by that is he never fails to be able to heal somebody. Like whoever he wants to heal, he heals. Like they all get healed. Every demon gets cast out. I mean, and so it can be frustrating when we say, but I've got Christ living inside me. Why is he not healing everybody I go touch? Right? Why is that not occurring? Well, I think the reason for that, one reason is we don't understand God's ways. We don't understand exactly why he allows certain things to happen. That's the obvious kind of reason that we put out there. But here's the other thing. Christ did all of these things with the intention primarily, not only, but his primary purpose of doing these miracles, it was to do what? That people would believe that he's the Messiah. So in other words, he needed to be able to separate himself from everybody else. And it needed to be crystal clear to anyone who was paying a bit of attention who he was. That does not exist today because he's no longer here. Now, he still will heal. We still pray for healing, and he does still heal people. I know this. I mean, I know we've had personal experience in our family of God meeting prayer and even of angelic, I'll call it angelic visitations. So it does happen, but it doesn't happen all the time. For whatever his reason, he has chosen not to do that. But when the Messiah is present, he cannot fail to heal. If he fails to heal, he's not the Messiah. If he fails to be able to exorcise a demon, doesn't have the power over the demonic world. So in one sense, it's frustrating because we read the New Testament and we go, why can't it be like Mark right there? Well, he's not bodily present. When he comes back again as the Messiah and sits on his throne, guess what? He has that power again. I mean, that things will change in that messianic kingdom. That's the reason why it says if someone were to die, and again, I guess this case is an unbeliever, if you die before you're 100, it's like dying as a baby. This type of stuff will be corrected when the Messiah is physically present. So for whatever reason God has for not always healing people while he's not physically here on the earth, we don't know the answers to that, and it can be frustrating. But there is a time coming when that is going to be rectified, right? And that would be the last thing I'd say. Any other questions or comments from anyone online? Anyone else in the room? Okay, great. So if there's no questions, again, just your homework here, I'll just kind of show it to you. Your homework for next week is to read Matthew 8:14 through 17, Mark 1:29 through 34, and Luke 4:38 through 41. It is the account of the healing of Peter's mother-in-law, as well as additional healings of demoniacs and others. So that'll be where we will pick it up next week. So until then, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.